So a man is a gender that typically corresponds with the sex of male.
How do you know when it's not associated with the sex?
When their gender identity is different than their sex.
No, how do you know their gender identity is different than their sex?
You could ask them, take their word for it. If you really want to be empirical about it, you could do an actual like neurological study, and you could see that actually the brains of trans people are more similar in architecture and activity to the brains of the gender they identify with than the sex they were born as. I'm pretty sure you're cisgendered. I'm cisgendered. My gender is man and my sex is male. So there you go.
How do you know your gender is man?
Because I feel my gender identity. Like, how do you know you're a man? You just as an identity that you have, that you feel. You like manly stuff.
Can women like manly stuff?
I'll explain
Grayson?
to you, Jimbob. In social situations, they can, yes. In
okay, so that's not a good distinction, dude.
I like to be treated as a man. I like to feel manly. I like manly things. It's not just one or two things. It's a compilation, a list of a bunch of different things. Just like
what are those things?
Secondary sex characteristics involved. There's appearances. Like I just said, I was listing them off just now.
Yeah.
Man is the gender that's typically associated with the sex male.
Yeah, but what's a man not typically associated with male then? Is that still a man?
Yeah, it's still a man. It's just a trans man. It's a man
who
was born biologically female.
You're saying a man is something typically associated with a male, right?
A man is a gender typically associated with someone whose sex is male.
Great. Can a man in another culture be typically associated to a female biologically?
Sure. There could be a culture where all of the biological females are treated masculine and all of the biological males are treated feminine. It'd be a very weird culture, but sure, it's possible.
What's one thing a man has that's not connected to a male, what a male has? What's one attribute or characteristics?
Traits.
Like what? Name one thing that a man that's distinct.
Traits.
Like what? Like what?
Well, I just listed one based on appearance.
Like wearing a skirt?
Skirts is one aspect. There's no one. There's no one.
A woman could wear a skirt
thing that can make you a man.
Okay, so if there's a woman who's not identical to a female and a man who's not identical to a male, and they both wear skirts, that's not a defining attribute or characteristic that distinguishes a man from a male or a man from a woman. So is there another one you have?
You can have very wide shoulders. That's seen as masculine. But there can be women that have wide shoulders. So you need more than just one trait. You need a suite of characteristics. Is that not obvious and straightforward to you? That shouldn't make sense.
No.
You should be able to understand that.
No. All of these characteristics could be shared by man, woman, male, female. Anyway, they could be overlapping. So I'm asking for the distinguishing characteristic, not the shared characteristic. Saying what is the distinguishing?
Not, bro. It's bimodal.
If it's bimodal, what are the two extremes of the bimodal?
Man, woman, and then in between, like the whole like bimodally distributed spectrum.
By saying man and woman, Grayson, you're actually now asserting again that there's a distinction called man and women that has that establishes two ends of a bimodal distribution. So I'm going to ask you,
if you
how
want
do you
actual distinguisher, if you want it,
what's the distinction?
I can just tell you the easiest way. The easiest way is just what is their gender identity. If they identify as male, or if they identify as man, they're man. If they identify as a woman, they're woman.
If the distinguishing factor between man and woman is self-internal proclamation, that you're just proclaiming it so, and that's the distinguishing factor, you no longer have a bimodal distribution because it's completely arbitrary and internally created.
Gender identity is generated in the brain. It's not like
so it's arbitrary.
It's
that's the same thing under your view, dude. Yeah, it is.
No, that doesn't make it arbitrary. No.
Okay, so if it's generated in the brain, if I stated I'm a woman, you could look in my brain and tell me I'm not?
Yeah, you could see whether or not, like, you're being serious or if you're lying.
So if I am a man, identify as a man in American culture, and I fly to another country, I'm no longer a man in that country, right, if it doesn't match?
What? No.
If the thing you're identifying in your brain is referencing culture, if I grew up in a culture and I identify as a gender that's not identical to my sex, if I go to another country that doesn't have that same bimodal distribution of descriptions of genders, am I still a man in that country?
You're a man in your head. I don't
In
know
my
about
own
that other
world.
country.
In my own world, right?
Okay, in the other country, if you're like in your country, if the gender role of being a man is perceived as a woman in that other country, then yes. Like if you go to
Then
that
you're
other
not a
country,
man.
they will perceive you as a woman, even though you will still feel like a man.
Gender, man and woman, is defined culturally inside a culture. That these things are determined by the culture, right? If you go into another country, the entire concept of man and woman, from your view, shows up to be completely illusory, totally made up.
Sure. Well, it is a
Sure.
social construct, Jimbo.
If gender is a construct, right? If I go into the neurological doctor and they say, "See, we found it. We're looking at the relationship between your gender and your sex or whatever," right? You just admitted that that person, if he goes to another country and the gender roles are completely different and what's expected of you is totally different, you admitted that that person's no longer a man just because they identify in one country and culture as a man. But now you're contradicting yourself. You're saying it's actually found in the brain.
What I had said is that in that country you're no longer a man. However, to you, you are still a man because your brain is still generating a man identity.
How is it that the other country can't look at the neurology and say, no, in fact, it's true, you are a man?
They can if they were actually like skilled enough scientifically. They could.
So that means your first statement, which is if a female identifies as a man in one country and then moves to another country and those social norms don't match up, you just said yourself they're not a man in that country. And yet now you're saying in premise 2 that empirically they would be if they just looked at the brain. Let's just say this, Grayson. Someone's a biological man. They're super muscular. They don't wear women's clothing. They don't present as a woman at all. They identify as a woman. Now, are you saying when I'm walking my daughter in public and she sees what looks like to her as a male who she identifies categorically as a man, dressed in a suit, strong, wide shoulders, has a sports team pin on, when she says, "Daddy, look at that man," are you saying she's lying?
No, she's just probably mistaken, and understandably so. And if that person like heard that and said, actually, I identify as a woman, then you could. It depends. Like if you want to respect other people, then you could teach your daughter that and say, look, like that's how they identify. It's a nice thing to do to use those.
Okay.
Terms.
If I tell my daughter to identify that as a man, but that occurs to her as a lie, why should she do it?
If she wants to be nice and respectful to other people around them.
So people should lie for other people's feelings? So what makes their feelings better than the feelings we get for having to lie? Why is one more valuable than the other, Grayson?
It just depends. It just depends on whether or not you want to raise your daughter to be a conscientious person.
Are they being conscientious of what goes on internally for myself and my daughter and people who think like me to force us to lie, right? I'm asking you a question, Grayson. Why is the feelings of the man who's dressed like a man, who's a biological male, saying, call me a woman, what makes their feelings more important than the internal conflict we experience by lying? Tell me what's distinguishable about the other that makes it more valuable that we bend the knee. Tell me. How do you prove someone's a man or a woman, Grayson? It's a social construct. You can't find a social construct. How do you comport a brain activity with a social construct and say that it's true?
Because it's being generated by the brain. Your concept of gender identity is currently, right now, being generated in your brain, and it can be measured.
What is it comporting with that's real such that you can say it's true? So you're saying in the brain there's a physical pattern, and the pattern, you look at it visually and you say that's a man, and you look at another one, it says that's a woman, right? I'm saying, what are you
Yeah.
referencing out in the world to know to label that a man or a woman?
Like the social construct in society.
So the person gets their brain activity. The doctor says, you're a man. We looked at the brain activity. They go to another country. The doctors in that country look at the same exact pattern, and you're saying that it could be not a man in the other country?
Sure, yeah. If the country is different, then the baseline is going to be different.
Yeah.
It could be more similar to the other country's baseline.
Yeah. You have no idea what you just did to your own position, but thanks for coming on. I appreciate it, Grayson. Come back anytime, okay?
People know that different concepts are different in different countries. Like, this is very common. Cool. Anybody that's traveled knows this.
Great. So, two doctors, right?
Well, hey, it was a pleasure talking with you, Jimbob. Real pleasure as always.
Yeah, no problem. From his view, a doctor looks at the brain and says, you're a man. The same female, right, goes to another country. The doctor says, well, you're not an American man. Grayson, his view is so insane that the conclusion is that in another country that doesn't share the same descriptions and attributes, characteristics of men and women, the doctor could actually say, oh, I just looked at your brain activity. It turns out you're an American man. Did you know that? It's like 23andMe, but genders around the world. That's how insane. This is the kind of insanity you need to bite the bullet on to defend these views. Think about that. Think about what he's saying. The doctor looks at your neurological stuff. You're an American man. It's a female. American female. She goes into another country, gets the same brain test. It's the same pattern. They say, you're not a man here. You're not a man here. But we looked closer. It turns out you are an American male. You're a man. You're an American man. So smooth.